And we're live. It is Tuesday, February 11th, the year of many of our lords, 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. and we were supposed to have a major snowstorm in Washington yesterday, or last night, but as with most major snowstorms that we are supposed to have, we didn't get any snow. That did not stop schools from closing. I hear the federal government may have an early close today. The Brookings Institution, where I work, is closing at noon, which is great because that means there's no point in going at all. I have an issue that I want to discuss with you all. It has come to my attention through the YouTube comments amassed by E.J. Wittes in Dog Shirt Daily the other day, that some of you are upset by my appearance. Now, there's a few different categories of irritation. One is the hammock. And I would like to read what a silly man in a hanging fabric chair, just listen to his inane rambling. Next comment, grown men who publicly present themselves in such slovenliness. Sorry, but the John Fetterman school of I'm rebellious teenager who refuses to grow up has no play with serious adults. Next comment, I think Ben is heading toward doing one of these shows in his boxer shorts. Okay, so there are three themes there. One is you don't like my hammock. The second is you think I should, gussy up a little bit, wear a suit. Remember, it's Dog Shirt TV. It would be kind of incongruous if I showed up in a suit. And the third is people think I should shave and wear, powder on my forehead so that I don't get this gleam. All right. I take all criticism seriously. I just want to remind you all that this is a revolution in morning television. Now, there is nothing revolutionary about sitting behind a desk with, powder on my forehead and a suit and doing all that stuff. That's not a revolution in morning television. The slovenliness is the revolution. The revolution is having co-hosts here in cybersecurity sweatshirts. The revolution is not telling people what to wear and not telling myself, well, other than, I roll out of bed and I do this show. And there's this wonderful solution for all of you who don't like it. Watch something else. There's a world of content out there for you. So I just want to say, I love it that people are hate watching this show. I think it is great. You are welcome. But no, I'm not going to dress up for you. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to ask my co-hosts to be all primped and, we're not going to sit around a table and, in looking like we just walked out of Mar-a-Lago. That's not what we're doing here. We're here and you are watching because this is Dog Shirt TV and it is a fucking revolution in morning television. And one of the reasons for that is not that I say fucking about it being a revolution. It's that I don't get dressed up for the show. I don't have a writer who's writing this for me. I'm just talking to you as though, as Alicia just said, Lauren, who I'm about to introduce, said, I'm excited for this because I have no idea what to expect. And Alicia said important, immortal words. She said, it's like talking to Ben. And that's actually what the show is. It's also like talking to Alicia, by the way. That's the revolution. It's just like having a conversation, only with a lot of other people present. So the sun isn't shining, the birds aren't chirping. Actually, they may be, for all I know. I'm not listening to the birds. It's going to be a great effing day. And you are watching Dog Shirt TV. It is a revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary aspects of it is that it is the first morning show ever to spend an entire hour talking to Lauren Buitta about oh, we're not allowed to say girls and women anymore. So we're the first show ever to talk about people in science and technology and national security. Lauren is one of my very favorite people in the world. She runs the group. Again, we're not allowed to say girls security anymore because that's been, it's on the NSA's list of banned words. She runs a group called Girls Security, which I'm going to let her talk about, but I will just say some of my favorite speaking appearances ever in recent years have been in front of, at Lauren's invitation, in front of groups of people who she assembles and teaches about national security issues. And so, Lauren, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, that was the laugh I needed. I did not expect those criticisms. That's amazing.
Susan Hennessy and I used to have this game. We would both go on television, and she would go on CNN and I would go on MSNBC. And the comments about Susan would always be about how she looked and about her voice, and the comments about me would be something about what I said. And it was a great controlled experiment because we said more or less the same thing, right? We were co-authors talking about the same book, about the same, we wrote a column together for a long time. And it was a great controlled experiment. We worked for the same organization. We had more or less the same title. She was executive editor, I was editor in chief, right? And so you take a older guy and a younger woman who have essentially the same persona on television, and every single comment about Susan is, that dress is blah blah blah, or your hair is, and every comment about me. I mean, a lot of them were disparaging, but they weren't about my appearance. And so I felt jealous because, like, I think people should be talking about what I wear and my makeup and my hairstyle, and and so I when the YouTube comments go in that direction, I always try to make an issue out of it.
It's so funny. Just so you know, when I was before logging on, I was getting my daughter out the door. I'm actually sitting in her room. And my husband was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm getting on a podcast." And I said, "You know Ben Wittes?" And he's like, "Oh, you're on Lawfare?" I was like, "No, no, no, no. This is his other podcast." And the way I described it is he sits in this boho chair in a dog t-shirt and you just talk to people. And he thought that was the coolest thing ever. So,
well, I think it's the coolest thing ever.
And it's so funny because I'm not going to filter myself just because I feel like this is a space where I don't have to. But when I think about my experience in national security, I'll never forget. So I'm from Illinois, and I used to work with the ABA Committee on Law and National Security, and not directly. I was working for another organization, but I didn't have a lot of means, and I didn't have a suit, and I had to go to a conference at the last minute in DC. So I ordered something online and had it shipped to the place where I was staying. And I took it out of the bag, and it was something that I would never wear because I dress sort of like turtlenecks head to toe, usually, for any number of reasons. That's a whole nother conversation. And I went to a conference, and it was just a basic black dress that was like slightly above the knee. And I think I was one of few women. I was probably like 24. And the number of people who propositioned me based on what they thought my dress represented was a moment I'll never forget. So just like
So
dress
that has literally never happened to me. Like I have never I have never had a situation where I've gone to a conference and somebody has interpreted my
a
suit.
national security
Right, a
conference.
national security conference,
Yes,
and
yes.
somebody has interpreted my suit to suggest sexual availability and just propositioned me. It's not, I literally have no analog to that experience.
Well, it was transformative. It was a quite a formative process for sure.
So, Alicia, um, explain to us what today is and why Lauren is here today as opposed to tomorrow or yesterday or 6 weeks from now.
So I'm first of all going to apologize because there is likely to be some noise behind me, which is why I was being quiet. But today is the United Nations International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So that's on the 11th of February.
So again, we're not allowed to say that anymore, Alicia. Maybe you still are in Canada,
I
but
am still in independent Canada. We are not another
I know, but
state.
this is an American-based show, and we are bound by the new DEI rules. And so, we're not allowed to say women and girls, or suggest that there may be any particular role for them in science. So, what we're going to say, this is a day of the International Day of Adults and Children in Science.
You may, but I'm going to keep saying it. And so we thought about some of the people in our community who would be great to have on and who have been doing work to elevate women and girls into a specific area. But I know that Lauren has been looking at STEM in particular in the context of national security. And this is why we are here today.
So why don't you start, Lauren, for those who are uninitiated in girls' security, to explain what the organization is and what you guys do?
Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks, Alicia. You're one of our rock stars. Yeah, I mean the mission of girl security, although the Y in our logo is also an X, that was very intentional, um, is really to advance more girls, women, and gender minority youth into national security pathways. I would say we focus primarily on at-risk girls and women because we believe that they are brought up in a world in which they're taught to fear everything, but actually secured from nothing. So while that is typically a really negative experience, we try to let them know that it's the sort of unsought aptitude that they bring into the national security space. And STEM is sort of a line through. We like to teach, we do teach technical things, but we try to provide an understanding of how STEM is applied or plays a role within the national security context for girls and women. So we have a really cool workforce development program, which Ben is one of our sort of superstar lecturers. And he's reaching truly hundreds of girls and women from disinvested communities. That's not on the hit list. But those are communities. Think of the south side of Chicago, where there's a lot of lack of access to not just education and after school training, but safety, security, transportation, food security. And they show up every week and they really want to be in this space, even if it poses risks to their family. They decide national security sounds scary, but I actually want to pursue a pathway in it. So we're sort of just activating that population to both learn about what national security is and find pathways in STEM within that sector, but also be engaged civically because our democracy requires their participation.
So how long has the organization been around, and what is the describe a little bit the sort of fabric of a given girl's participation in it.
Yeah.
What does it look like to become involved as a South Side Chicago kid in girl security?
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, the organization is sort of IRS officially, it will be 6 years old in June. I started it in 2016 more as a volunteer effort. I really wanted to understand how girls were thinking about national security, so I just traveled across the country to really remote places and just was asking them like, hey, what do you think about national security? And they would say like the military and spies and men in black. And it's some and all of those things, but it was really an effort to try to create a mosaic of like, how do they see this space? And then how do we identify opportunities to sort of disrupt their understanding and get them activated, knowing that like, yes, we talk about national security, but like national security is so different now. And um, it's global security, and it's all of these ways that affect them personally and at the federal, national, and global levels. So like for a girl in our program, let's just take on the South Side of Chicago. It's actually really cool because we launched the first national security high school clinics last year, and the first ever in the country. And the first high school is actually the high school that my dad attended on the South Side of Chicago, which is now 100% Latino. And so a girl in that program will sort of learn about girl security either through direct engagement with the organization. I usually try to go and speak to the schools because at least in Chicago, it's where I grew up. I know the area, and I can sort of connect with an understanding of some of the challenges that they're experiencing. And for many of them, they've never heard about national security. If they've heard about cybersecurity, it feels pretty distant, so you have to remember these are populations that either like culturally or demographically may not have access to college. And as girls and women, because of the roles they play in their family or community, may be responsible for bringing in household income. So our goal is to like provide them with actual skills they can take into the workforce while also creating a space of belonging and then creating pathways for them into jobs. Um, but I would say like it's not just, I think one of the things about workforce training is it sets this like really specific understanding of what we do, but we're really inviting them into a space to like build skills, but also grapple with like the ethical implications of dual use technologies, which is what the clinics are looking at now. They're assessing an AI based tool that was designed to detect debris in commercial airspaces that's now being used at the border for immigration. And so they have to kind of grapple with and design solutions for those things within the context of national security. So they complete a 15-week training program, and then they enroll into our mentoring program, and they can stay into our mentoring program until they're 26. So they might enter at like 17, 18 years old, and then they can stay in almost like in perpetuity. I found in national security, I think in general, um, national security is like a pretty elitist space. That was my experience. And so we really wanted to create a space where no matter what happened, they could always come back into the organization. And I think we also place a high level of burden on young people. We like impose our expectations of how they should engage professionally. And if they don't respond to your emails, sometimes they don't follow through on things. And this is really an open door.
They
Like,
are teenagers.
they are teenagers. So like even if they fuck up, they can come back in and that door will always be open to them. And it works. I don't know what else to say. The metrics are really good. We have a lot of positive engagement, and it's like the most important thing I'll do aside from raising my kids.
So what counts as like how what counts do you have of people who have been involved in the program over the 6 years? Like how many schools
Yeah.
are involved? How many people have gone through it?
So we have our workforce training program, we have our mentoring program. So we've had over 3,000, probably 3,500 this year mentees. So that's, girls, women, and gender minority youth who've gone through our mentoring program. And even within that program, our retention rate and re-engagement is like somewhere around 97%. So it's a really low, low requirement for mentors, but super high impact for outcomes. For our workforce training program, we will have about 650 fellows by the end of this year. And we have an 87% placement rate into opportunities. So that means everyone who's completing that 15-week program is finding jobs or opportunities within the national security sector, and the re-engagement. So like we kind of use like the diffusion theory of like creating networks of people who then can re-engage as they go through their pathways and sort of diffuse a sense of belonging, diffuse their knowledge, diffuse their skills. And so again, that's where we have just a really high engagement rate, and continuity, which is by design. We need to have to do that.
And before I turn it over to Alicia, I, you know, one of the things that is always astonishes me about this organization is how big those numbers are compared to the actual size of the organization. So,
So
so,
true.
what is your budget?
Our budget is about 800,000. We have, yeah, it's pretty wild. I actually think about it. It's pretty crazy when I look at other budgets, but we
Right.
have, yeah,
Just to, I want to just focus on that for a second. So, $800,000 a year, and that's training 3,000, it's a mentorship program of 3,000, and you've done sort of 650 intensive, although that's not all in one year, of course. But so let's say, it's about 4,000 people three to 4,000 people who are interacting with the program at $800,000 a year. That's an incredibly small number of dollars invested per person.
it is. It is. And that doesn't include like we've created a bunch of open source curriculum that we serve about 250,000 students just through our open source curriculum. So that's like national security learning modules on like ethical decision making and open source intelligence. Uh, I think the challenge is we've grown really slowly and intentionally, which is sort of by design, and we've developed a lot of efficiencies. And the problem is we've never wanted for demand. Like we always have a wait list. We have like almost over 100 high schools who want to onboard our clinics. But the problem is it's not a scaling problem. It can be solved with more capacity. But I think when people talk about like workforce, they're like, here, we've created all this curriculum. Come and do it and you'll be in good shape. And as you know, Ben and Alicia, that you supporting teenagers, you're pouring a lot into every single person in the program. And and that makes the work that we do, it has to be trauma informed because most of the girls in our program have experienced gender-based or community-based violence. It has to include all of the relevant educational frameworks that teachers are using, like social emotional learning. It has to be adaptive to language and learning demands that kids might bring into our program. So it's it's a worthwhile investment that can have a lot of impact, as you say, like on a very small budget.
Well,
And to be clear, you aren't housed somewhere. So you also have all the costs of running an organization, which itself are a high burden.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's just there's a number of different challenges, but I would say like our team, who are all former national security people, by the way, have developed systems that have allowed us to both grow but also maintain the trust of the people we serve. And like that's everything for us. And I think right now, because of what's happening as a result of the executive orders, we're getting this like influx of people, right, who don't now have a space they can go to do the things that we think are so necessary and why we've not partnered with contingencies or received federal funding. Um, you need to have a safe space you can go to ask hard questions, whether it be about like workplace violence or ethical issues. You need to have that protected space. And so I think our challenge right now, I saw someone put this in the chat, is how do we grow our capacity without degrading the integrity of the work? And I don't know the answer to that yet.
yeah, we have a very similar problem at
Yeah.
Lawfare. And it's a very hard problem. So one way you're going to do it is to grow your individual donor base. And so let me point out to everybody, while Lauren was just talking, I made a contribution at girlsecurity.org slash donate. And you should too.
Thanks.
I've decided, by the way, when people come on the show, like yesterday when I was writing Dog Shirt Daily last night, I included a pitch for people to contribute to an organization called Rebirth Ukraine, which is a group of really, really lovely Ukrainian activists in Washington and New York who do highly theatrical street protests, and a whole bunch of y'all clicked on the link and donated to Rebirth Ukraine. Thank you to everybody who did. And so I'm going to start including people's organizations when they come on the show, and include a pitch both on the on the show and in the accompanying dog shirt newsletter for people to give. So y'all, girl security, only one S. It's not
One,
girls
it's not.
security. It is girlsecurity.org/donate.
Thank
Just
you.
go do it.
Thank you.
Alicia.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of that, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, Lauren, but John Hawkinson asked in the chat, what fraction of your budget is at risk currently, given the situation? Broadly speaking, I paraphrased the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, John. And I think for every nonprofit working on girls and women, everyone is at risk. I think because we have not relied on federal funding, we are going to have challenges, but they may not be as grave as smaller local nonprofits, like a lot of domestic violence nonprofits that we know are going to be, if they've not already shut down, they will be shutting down for that reason. And so I think that the challenge is,
Because as a society now, we are pro domestic violence. It's
well, I mean,
it's a qualification for holding certain offices. Without a domestic violence charge, you're just not adequately male for this administration.
I mean, I
Gee,
actually think,
why wouldn't we want to be a state?
I think what domestic violence has always been, I mean, it's sort of, again,
No, but
on the
we
line.
used to at least say we were against it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the challenge goes to, um, there's a bigger issue at play, which is I think there's sort of a societal, uh, a strong bias or misunderstanding about what services nonprofits provide. And the reason we exist, not just girl security, but any nonprofit, right, is to supplement or complement services that the federal government cannot provide and which corporate America may prioritize. So I think the hard part about this moment is that um, there was this huge push into DEI when many of us never called our work DEI. We don't consider it DEI, even though we might employ those frameworks. And so
And why don't you? What?
It's not that we don't. I guess what I would say is like we wouldn't name ourselves as a DEI initiative because diversity, equity, and inclusion, like trauma informed, like social and emotional learning, it's a framework to overlay on your work that sort of adds some depth or components to how you do it or how you engage. And so I think what happened is that it became this like broad-based, it was broad-based adopted. And I think corporate America sort of catapulted it into the ecosystem. And so all of us who were doing the work, have been doing the work for a long time, are sort of the collateral damage for the moment, frankly. And so we have to keep figuring out how to go on where people have sort of widely abandoned this framework. And the challenges from this are going to be significant for a long time.
I would expect that you have easy knowledge at your fingertips in terms of what in the old times the challenges were for women getting into national security and STEM. So one, what were the challenges? And I know it's kind of early days, but I'm sure with your background, you can imagine how those challenges may change or increase. But I'd be just curious to understand more about the barriers for young women entering these fields.
Yeah, I mean, I think sadly, with respect to like STEM pathways and national security, and sort of there's obviously like a commingling within that space, the numbers have remained like pretty static around 15 to 22% in most pathways. That includes all STEM pathways, as well as like national security pathways, like intelligence analyst or, in the military service members. I think the hard part is we're now seeing a decline, like over the last 2 years and more recent survey data, like the number of women entering physics, the number of women entering computer science has dropped off. Actually, I think in physics, it's like they've seen the first decline in over 30 years, drop from like 19 to 13%. So that has implications, obviously, for quantum computing pathways in the future. Um, I mean, the barriers look very much the same, in terms of lack of access, lack of role models, discrimination, lack of access to training, to mentorship, sort of all of the traditional barriers that existed before remain intact. I think the challenge is right now, from what I'm hearing from folks, is that there's there's sort of like a zeal or a zest with which people are implementing some of the executive order decisions. And, the concern is always that, you'll have the traditional barriers of like just understanding and identifying what the pathways are and then getting to them. And then you have the workplace safety and inclusion issues, which again, I know, for example, that the Navy stopped their sexual assault trainings. The Navy ceased all of the MOUs. This was just today. They ceased all of the MOUs that they had with affinity or supportive organizations that were focused on supporting women. And so when you sort of remove some of those mechanisms that are there because they're needed, I think it just adds a layer of challenges that all of us will have to figure out how to correct.
What about your relationships with school systems? So
Hmm.
I could imagine I don't want to give them any ideas, but a Chicago public school system that really, really wanted to be overprotective of its own relationship with, say, the education department to the extent that that continues to exist, um, uh, could get nervous, right, about obviously not with respect to sports, because there we reify gender distinction, but in things like security training, STEM training, are you worried about school systems ceasing to participate or cooperate?
I'm not. And I think that's maybe the benefit of working, so our program is national, but we have regional hubs. And I think at the end of the day, like when you're working on the ground, so even though we're virtual, we do the work on the ground. We're physically where we are. Um, Communities understand the need. They understand that on the south side of Chicago, there are higher rates of gender-based violence, and that girls physically cannot leave their homes aside from attending school because of levels of gang violence, and that they need identity-centered approaches. And so I think they're committed to maintaining an investment in girls specifically. And I think that's sort of that's what I hope comes out of this is identity-centered approaches which value the experiences of any individual should not be sort of the baby out with the bathwater of getting caught up in sort of identity politics and culture wars or whatever people call it. I don't even know anymore because it doesn't really, I don't really care what people call it. At the end of the day, people, young people especially, need approaches that center their experiences and who they are and how they identify. And so I think for girl security and our local partners, it's not our job to tell them who they should be, where they should go, what they should think. It's to honor the identity that they come into our work with and to do the best we can to help them get into a job that provides economic mobility for them and their family.
What would you
John,
say?
I was just going to respond. I saw John's question and I would say,
Wait.
oh,
John, come on and ask your question. So because the people out in YouTube land can't hear your question when you type it in the chat. And that's, by the way, true of all Greek chorus members. When you're commenting, talking to each other, do it in the chat. But when you're talking to the guest, come on screen and do it, please, so that the audience can hear you. Or in the alternative, um, uh, uh, ask, the guest can read it or I can read it, although I don't have the chat up right now. But Lauren, why don't you read John's question?
John wrote, what fraction of girls can't leave their homes because of gang violence fears? That feels so foreign to this privileged person. So in Chicago, which is a large city of we used to be 3 million people. I think it's like 2.3 million. Over 98% of the Black and Latino population live in about 6 community areas on the south side of Chicago. So that's like a million and something people. And within that population, there's something like, a few 100,000 girls. And all of them exist within a sort of zone of vulnerability. Um, a large percentage of the south side of Chicago is gang controlled. There's like actually very few blocks that are not gang controlled. One of our partners is on the only block in that community area that's not gang controlled. So there's a high level of vulnerability for, let's say, hundreds of thousands of girls in the city.
Thank you.
Yeah, so uh Alicia, you were going to say something.
I think I lost it. It was just the whole exchange. John didn't get to ask his question, and then it was just thank you and gone.
It's
I know.
okay. People come on when they come on,
Great.
they disappear when they disappear. It's up to them. But my only point is if you have a question, we don't want the guest to be in the position of dialoguing with the chat in a fashion that the outward facing audience cannot follow.
Because that's
So,
what I'm doing. That's just for the record. Um, I was going to ask for people who are currently working in national security jobs, organizations, institutions, and stuff, and who are sensitive and concerned about young women entering the field. What advice would you give to them? I mean, some of it to me seems like it would be super basic, like be a decent human being, but what would you coach them in terms of helping women along who are just entering now, especially?
Um, this is a much harder question now than it was. I mean, I think the way that we try to frame one, and let me take a step back. Like one of the things that I loved about national security because I started working in the space.
and give people a sense of what your background is, because
Yes,
before.
that's yeah. Um, I started working for a small national security think tank in Chicago, like shortly after September 11th. So, like maybe 2002, 2003, I started working, and my brother was deployed eventually to Iraq. So, like, I was working at a national security think tank. My brother was deployed. I was volunteering with women Iraqi construction business leaders, and like, there was this whole swell of emotion that I had around like boy, people really don't understand what national security is because I would sit in bars with my friends and they were like, are you against or for the war? And it'd be like, I'm for the war. And it'd be like, oh, that's it. Okay, great, move on. And I just felt like very confused by why young people didn't understand what national security is and its significance. And so that actually like prompted girl security. I sent an email to my brother when he was deployed, like, I think I'm going to start something for girls and national security. And he was like, good luck with that. See you later. This was like 2006, let's say. Um, and my experience at the time was, I mean, I was one of few young women and I had terrible things said and done to me. I was eventually assaulted by my employer. And I left national security and I ended up I spent about 10 years working on 2 civil rights lawsuits against the city of Chicago for exclusionary zoning and civil rights violations before starting girl security. Um, so, like, the advice we would give to girls and women before was around what national security is and why their engagement, even if it's just developing a basic understanding, is so important. It will shape and touch every aspect of their life, and their contributions matter. Now, the conversations might look a little differently because we are getting inquiries about, like, how do I handle this? How do I handle job insecurity? I was waiting on my security clearance. So, like, we're getting more technical questions about how to navigate those things. And I think the idea is, for better or for worse, so many of the women and people in our community have lived through really complex national security moments. It's why we all love the work. It's like, it's a space you could come and disagree and find consensus, even if there were like really deep ethical and legal sort of complications in what you were deciding or discussing. And so I think we're just trying to reassure them that they have a community of people who've lived through a lot of really complex moments. And while we might not have all of the answers, we can just be a community they can exist in. So, like, aside from the like, how do you get a job? How do you navigate this? It's the how do you just like mentally exist in this moment right now? And I think just being in community with people is really almost like the most valuable thing we can do.
And what is the this is a question that the answer maybe have so much scatter that it doesn't have a meaningful answer, but what is the median placement? So when somebody goes through this program and ends up as a, 23, 24, 25-year old working in the field, are these is it heavily military? Is it cybersecurity work? What are people doing? What are the big clusters? Maybe
Yeah.
is a better way to ask that.
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of interest in law enforcement and intelligence, FBI, CIA, a lot of interest in cybersecurity and AI, a lot of interest in biosecurity, climate security, sort of the sciences related to those pathways, a fair amount interested in policy, and I would say like a small fraction interested in national security law, which I'm always like, come on in, we need more of you. Go find Ben. Um, yeah, so like it's a pretty interesting set of clusters. Uh, I think again, a small percentage interested in like human rights, humanitarian type work, but most, of course, have no, I mean, for any young person, as you know, like you have this idea of what you want to do and you don't understand the like thousands of different pathways. But I would say like safely, those are the clusters that most people are interested in.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is actually really interesting. And I always find it really interesting to go into some of the communities we serve, knowing their historical relationship in national security. And they'll say, like, I want to go into the FBI, I want to go into DHS, I want to actually be part of this system that may have impacted my family somehow. And I want to be a part of that. I just think to me, that is like the most remarkable and inspiring thing, like reality of the work that we do.
Do people feel that way about the Chicago Police Department? Or because I could see like the FBI being sort of further from um, their sense of what the security agencies that cause problems for them is there interest in local law enforcement as well?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I know that the numbers of women pursuing law enforcement, sort of like emergency response, is still very, very low. And there's some complementary efforts of folks we partner with who are working on those specific pathways too.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess I would venture to say that like and studies have bared this out. Like there's a great organization called Rocks, which surveys girls and women every year, but then they do like a 5 year like a survey of 25,000 people. And the takeaway, which is what we see in our work, is they want purpose. They look for purpose driven paths. And I think we see that it's like the number one reason girls pursue paths in national security. It's the number one reason they pursue pathways or find an interest in STEM roles. They're looking for a career that has some kind of purpose. Um, yeah.
I mean, just listening to everything that you were saying about like pathways and challenges and things that women face coming up in this career was bringing back so many memories. It's so amazing that young women have this opportunity. I remember falling into security kind of by accident and not really having any kind of guidance of pathways forward. I came from a very rural environment. None of my family was really working in those spaces. I had like one great uncle who was a police officer, firefighters, but this is not at all where I ended up landing. And just how challenging it was to navigate. Like I had a great boss, which was good, but you would get invited to, I won't say the company, but a notorious company that was well known for treating women badly, and they would bring analysts down. And were it not for one other Canadian female tech analyst basically watching out for me, I'm not sure what kind of protections I would have had. And just navigating that kind of space where you're very junior, you're trying to, like, you're 25 years old, you don't really have the worldly experience to know what's happening. And again, we're entering in spaces where it's very male dominated. A lot of them are coming out, especially when you get into national security, a lot of people are coming out of police and military. The culture can be quite different. It's just so amazing that there is a program like Girl Security to help introduce these young women.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your experience too. And I was saying to people, like to our team, because we were kind of talking through the moment, and I worked construction in Chicago through college. So I was the only woman laborer on every commercial job site I was on. And I encountered some stuff. Like I was given a broom to dust the hallways. Like the hottest day in Chicago was like 108 degrees in a locked hallway without sweeping compound. So like I was 18 sweeping in this like heat and passed out and fell down a few flights of stairs. And then like there was no portage on for me, so I had to go up to the floor where they were doing asbestos removal, and it was like a big joke. And chased around the job sites. And then in law school, I had a professor who, during office hours, was like, "Hey, if your marriage doesn't work out, let me know." And I reported him, and it turns out he had harassed a number of other people. Well, guess who handed me my my degree at graduation? This professor that I had reported. And then into national security. And it was just, I don't think people understand the mental burden that, and it's not just girls and women, it's other people as well. But obviously, like, that's the experience that I know. I wouldn't assume to know if somebody else is. The mental burden that you have to endure to do something you love, it's just, um, it's just so unnecessary. Everyone's path, girls, women, all people, should be easy if it's pursuing something that they love and they want to contribute to. And I just feel like national security is one of those spaces where we need as many people who care getting involved in this work.
So, what does that look like if you don't happen to be female? So, I struggle with this a fair bit. I have tried to make Lawfare a place that, for one thing, publishes young women, which, that's actually the easy part because a lot of young women uh, go through the national security world relatively overlooked.
Mhm.
And if you create opportunities for people to write stuff, number one, it's very good for business. It's not an untapped talent stream, but it's an underutilized talent stream. And so there's a lot of good material, and you can do very well by doing good. Uh, and you try to create a workplace where people are willing to be open and candid and are not constantly on guard because we call it at Lawfare the no assholes rule, that we will actually
We have
enforce
that
it.
rule.
And it's it's quite explicit, actually, like we don't tolerate people behaving badly across any axis of activity. But beyond that, and speaking at girls' security events when you ask me to, what's the like? It sort of feels like there's a general. You're describing an extremely uh, inequitable distribution of burden. And the question is, what is the, what is the, and you're creating organizations to train girls. What's the reciprocal side of that? That the, the percentage when I teach a class, um, of hands raised that are male is just awesomely high. And I don't ever want to tell anybody to shut up. But there just seems to be a structural set of impediments that training girls is one side of, but there's just gotta be a different side of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I have a lot of thoughts in my head. I mean, I think there's like a Venn diagram. It's sort of how we prioritize certain qualities of expression and performance within an educational setting. And just as an example, you're talking about hands raised. In our programs, we have the option to hand raise, but we also have an anonymous box where like people can drop questions. And again, it's not because we're enabling, like someone said to me, um, they didn't quite use like the really pejorative word, but it's the kind of like snowflake. And our response is, you don't understand. This might be a girl who has experienced sexual violence in her home. And this is the first time she's in a space where she can actually express herself. And her first instinct is not going to be to raise her hand. It might be to write something down and sort of think about it and second guess. Um, so I think like there's ways that we assess performance and engagement in an education setting that are flawed, in my opinion, because they don't accommodate for the sort of diversity of experiences that bring to the table. And I understand that solutions are hard to scale and all that other stuff, but I think we can be more empathetic in an education setting in general. I mean, I think within the workplace, um, I don't want to say that there needs to be like the same program for men because that makes this like very binary, like if we fix this, then we need to fix this. I think there are sort of like systems and cultural enablers that keep these very harmful practices intact, whether that be like outmoded HR systems. Like, for example, we have a young woman a couple years ago who reported a colleague for sexual harassment, and the ombudsman sat them both down in his office and was like, all right, you two talk it out. So there's like some HR systems and structures that are outmoded and haven't been up to date with like social science and mental health and all the things. Obviously, like how we evaluate leadership is so flawed and doesn't reflect the diversity of experiences that people bring in. I could probably write like a thesis that I'll never write about ways in which we need to change that. I do think for us, one of the things we've been really intentional about is knowing that it is a diverse ecosystem. And while girl security supports girls, women, and gender minority youth, we also have initiatives that leverage what we call the curb cut effect. So we design things for the most at risk. And just there's a lot of social science that says like if you do that, then it's actually easy to scale up things that serve everyone. So a lot of what we do at Girl Security, we're eking out learnings and tools that we are then making available to everyone. And just to give you an example, we created a reverse mentoring toolkit so that young people could mentor up senior leaders. And it's this great way to like, kind of break down hierarchies, transfer knowledge, and all that other stuff. That's available to anybody. Anybody can use that for their
This
workplace.
is so important. I mean, I just want to say, like, as somebody who, lawfare is built around my mentoring people. That's how
Yeah.
it came to exist. And the percentage of that is them training me, um, which they're mostly unaware of, but because that's not how they experience it. But the percentage of it that is what I learn from them is enormously high. And that's been going on for like my first mentees are now right around 40, a little bit high, a little bit older. And so if you mentor people every year, the percentage of, of the amount that you learn over time, there's just a huge amount of area under the curve for the senior person. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
True. And I think, and it, like, again, it touches to what you asked about how to change the ecosystem. You have to be someone who comes to a space of assuming you don't know it. You have to have humility. You have to believe that younger generations have something to teach you and that you have something to learn. I mean, there's so many different facets of this that like I think it's are ripe for innovation and sort of disruption, not just in national security, in every workplace. And so yeah, I mean, it's a really complicated picture. I think we just have this like very specific slice of what it is, and we can't do everything. My son would love me to start boy security, but I'm like, let's get this one, let's get stable here.
there's there's such a like I'm gonna this is gonna be such an obvious statement from me, but like we're all part of an ecosystem, right? And like it just because we come up a certain way and the experiences we had does not mean that we have to replicate that and other people have to experience the shit that was thrown at us. And I think sometimes it can be really hard for people as they age, as they move up ranks, to realize that they don't have to replicate that, that they can be like Ben, they can learn to be better, and things can change. And we're giving and taking. There was another point that you'd mentioned about just even like talking and learning styles. I grew up with a person who was very big into pedagogy. And so, you know, from a very early age, there was an awareness of like people learn different ways. And it's not just women, but like introverts, right? The whole system is structured to favor extroverts who are outgoing and want to share things. And then to that end, because like we are at 5 minutes too, I'm bringing the shirt back. This is my shirt that I wear if I actually really want to engage with people because it never fails to start a conversation. And I wore it for you today, Lauren, because normally I wouldn't wear a sweatshirt, but it's a Cyber WarCon shirt and they give it to their speakers. It's a conference in DC. And it's one of those things where, you know, there are other ways to get people to talk to you without having them hit on you. It took a long time to learn. The sweatshirt goes a long way.
I love, and you know, I think the work you do is like truly groundbreaking.
So we have, oh, sorry, Alicia, go ahead.
No, I'm uncomfortable with praise. And I'm like, no, Lauren, this is about you. You're doing amazing things.
Yeah. Praising Alicia, particularly in front of other people, is you can just watch her get uncomfortable, which is actually kind of fun. So yeah, we have 3 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions, comments, screams of protest, howls of rage, cries of agony, this is your last chance. Lauren, what are the next big girl security events coming up?
Survival, Ben. That's the next big security event. I mean, no, we're doing some really cool stuff. I mean, our workforce program is going to be wrapping up. We're working on a pilot to teach at-risk girls about quantum computing. We're doing some convenings and wargaming on the future of global health and biosecurity. And again, it's all intergenerational. So we're bringing young people in our program together to the table with senior leaders. We just have like really cool stuff. We're building an AI tool to sort of talk, you know, touches on the reverse mentorship thing. We're just trying to, honestly, Ben, like, we're trying to not be redundant. We're trying to stick with what we know, find targeted opportunities where we can add value, and stay out of the fray. That feels like that's the strategy.
It's extremely important work. I have spoken to girl security groups virtually and in person. It's actually a super moving experience. And hey, do me a favor and in 48 hours, send me an email with the amount of money raised over the course of these 48 hours, because I am going to, starting with the Rebirth Ukraine example, I'm going to start publishing how much the Dogshirt Daily community is raising for organizations that one or the other of us decides to promote. And so, I arbitrarily decided on a 48-hour window because that gives people time to open the emails and say, do I want to do what Wittes tells me this time, or do I not? But I think we should be as a community supporting the organizations that we value, particularly because the federal government doesn't seem to want to do it anymore. Not that you guys were getting a lot of federal money, but the ecosystem is changing. And if we don't support these organizations, who do we expect to do it? So I will bother you about it in a couple days. Alicia,
Girlsecurity.org. I was reminded, John has reminded us.
girlsecurity.org/donate.
Thank you
Um,
all so much. I mean, honestly, Ben, thank you. This is it's an extension of who you've always been to people, and I really appreciate you making space for us to talk about our work.
as you know, I am thrilled to do it, and I care about your work a lot.
Thanks.
And we are out of time before this gets too maudlin. Um, Lauren Buitta, you're a great American. Alicia Wanless, you're a great independent Canadian. Still, I should say independent Canadian. We are going to be back. It's the good news for Canada is that Trump really seems fixated on Gaza right now. So increase your military spending, deploy to the border.
Beg the Brits to come back.
There's hope for independent Canada yet. We're going to be back tomorrow. We have a guest tomorrow, but I haven't looked at my calendar, and I therefore don't know who it is.
I know.
Alicia knows.
It is Katarina Schmatzina. It says nothing. You've made this up.
It is, yeah, her name does sound made up. Katie Schmatzina is my favorite insurrectionist in the world. She is convicted in her native Belarus of a January 6th like crime, which is to say, sort of seditious conspiracy trying to overthrow the government, which is to say, she's a think tank analyst. And she's a hilarious person who has been on the show before. And you should all come join us in whatever Eastern European language you want to chat with her in. That'll be tomorrow, same time. And, you know, it's going to be okay. And it's going to be okay because we're all going to make it okay. We will see you tomorrow.